I need to get this out because I'm still processing what happened 3 weeks ago. And honestly, I don't know if I'll ever fully understand how my own family could do this. I'm 28 and I deliver pizza. There it is. That's apparently the most shameful thing a person can do according to my parents. I work for a local pizza place, make decent money with tips, and yeah, I have 2 roommates in a 3-bedroom apartment. I'm not rich, but I pay my bills and I'm happy enough. Or I was. My grandmother died on a Thursday morning. She was 84 and had been declining for months. So, it wasn't unexpected, but it still hurt. She was the one person in my family who never made me feel like garbage for my life choices. When I'd visit her at the nursing home, she'd ask about my day and actually listen. She never once brought up why I wasn't a lawyer or doctor, like she apparently told all her friends I was. Yeah, you read that, right? Turns out my parents had been lying to Grandma's entire social circle about what I do for a living. I found this out in the worst possible way. The call came during my lunch break on Friday. I was sitting in my 2009 Toyota Camry eating a sandwich when Mom's name popped up on my phone. I figured she was calling about funeral arrangements, maybe asking if I could help with something. I answered and immediately knew something was wrong because she didn't even say hello. She just launched right in telling me not to come to the funeral. I actually laughed at first because I thought she was joking, like some kind of weird grief response. But then she got louder and explained that I would be embarrassing the family. All of Grandma's friends are doctors and lawyers and successful people. And what was she supposed to tell them when they asked what I do? That her 28-year-old son delivers pizza and can't even afford his own place. I sat there in my car with my phone pressed to my ear trying to understand what was happening. This was my grandmother's funeral, the woman who raised my mom, and I was being uninvited because of my job. Before I could even respond, Dad grabbed the phone. He informed me that they'd already told everyone I was working overseas in international consulting. It was less embarrassing than the truth. He said those exact words. Less embarrassing than the truth. My brother Declan got on the phone next. He's 31 and works in finance, engaged to a woman named Piper, whose family apparently has money. He explained that Piper's parents would be at the funeral and they think our family has class. Me showing up in my work uniform would ruin that impression. I wasn't even planning to wear my uniform, but apparently the assumption was that I'm too stupid to own regular clothes. My sister Zaria, who's 26 and works in marketing, added that they'd already picked a replacement pallbearer. Our cousin Russell has a real job. She said, a real job? Like what I do isn't real work. Then Mom got back on the phone and made an offer. She said they'd acknowledge I exist if I paid for the entire funeral, $22,000. Otherwise, stay away. Dad added that they needed $18,000 for the headstone, too, and I had 24 hours to decide. I told them that was impossible. I had maybe $4,000 in savings. They all laughed. Mom brought up how our cousin Morgan just bought her second house, and I can't even buy a used car without it breaking down, which was a reference to my Camry needing a new transmission last year, something I'd mentioned in passing at Christmas. Before Dad hung up, he told me they'd packed up my childhood room and donated everything to Goodwill. My old books, my high school yearbooks, photos, everything. It was all gone. Then the call ended. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes trying to figure out what had just happened. My family had disinvited me from my own grandmother's funeral because they were ashamed of my job. They'd been lying about me for years. And now they wanted me to pay $40,000 for the privilege of being acknowledged as their son. The thing is, I wasn't even that surprised. I'd known for years that they looked down on me. Every family gathering involved pointed questions about when I was going back to school, when I was going to get a real career, why I was wasting my potential. My dad once introduced me to his golf buddy as his daughter's brother, completely skipping over the fact that I'm his son. Declan got a new BMW for his 25th birthday. I got a gift card to a restaurant for mine. And Mom made a comment about how at least I could get one nice meal. But this was different. This was my grandmother's funeral. And they were erasing me from it. I went back to work and finished my shift because what else was I going to do? I delivered pizzas to college kids and families and tried not to think about the fact that my own family considered me so worthless that they'd rather pretend I didn't exist than admit what I do for a living. That night, I started making calls. I needed to understand the full scope of this situation. I called my Aunt Carrie, my mom's sister. She confirmed that yes, everyone in the family had been told not to tell me about funeral arrangements. She sounded uncomfortable but said she understood why my parents made this choice. The optics, she said. The optics of having a pizza delivery driver at a funeral. I called my cousin Russell, the one who was replacing me as pallbearer. He at least had the decency to sound guilty. He told me that Declan had asked him 3 days ago before Grandma even died. They'd been planning this. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made in grief. They discussed it, decided I was too much of an embarrassment, and made arrangements to exclude me. Here's what really got me though. I called the funeral home to ask about costs. The total for everything, including the headstone, was $12,000, not $40,000. My parents had tried to extort me for more than 3 times the actual cost, probably figuring I'd never check. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Grandma and how she'd asked me about my job without judgment. How she'd seemed genuinely interested in the stories I told about customers and coworkers. And now I couldn't even say goodbye to her because my family had decided I wasn't good enough. Saturday came and I had a choice to make. I could show up anyway and cause a scene. I could pay what I had and try to negotiate, or I could do something else entirely. I'd been working as a delivery driver for 6 years. Before that, I'd done 2 years of college before dropping out because I hated it and was drowning in debt. My parents had never forgiven me for that. In their minds, I'd thrown away my future. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been saving money. I'd been planning and I'd been building something. See, 3 years ago, I started doing food delivery on top of my pizza job. Apps, multiple platforms, working 70-hour weeks. I saved everything I could. Last year, I'd started investing in cryptocurrency and got lucky with a few picks. Nothing crazy, but enough that my savings weren't just the $4,000 they assumed I had. I had options. I'd always had options. I just let them think I was broke and struggling because it was easier than dealing with their judgment if they knew I was actually doing okay. Sunday morning, 16 hours before the funeral, I made my decision. I wasn't going to give them money. I wasn't going to show up and make a scene. I was going to do something they'd never expect. I was going to make them come to me. At 2 a.m. Monday morning, all 4 of them were outside my apartment building screaming my name. Update 1. Okay, so the comments on my last post on Hidden Lies were wild. Some of you guessed what I did. Most of you were way off. And a few of you told me I should just let it go and move on. To those people, respectfully no. You don't get to uninvite someone from their grandmother's funeral and then face 0 consequences. Let me back up to Sunday afternoon about 18 hours before they showed up outside my apartment screaming. After that phone call on Friday, I spent Saturday doing research. I called the funeral home like I mentioned and confirmed the actual cost. $12,000, not $40,000. Then I started thinking about why they'd lied about the price and it clicked. They needed money, not wanted. Needed. See, here's what I knew about my family's finances that they didn't realize I knew. 2 years ago at Thanksgiving, I overheard Dad on the phone in the garage. He was talking to someone about refinancing the house. He sounded stressed. Then last Christmas, Declan mentioned that he'd loaned Mom and Dad money for some repairs. He said it quietly to Zaria, but I was in the next room putting dishes away. My parents have always lived above their means. Country club membership they couldn't afford, new cars every 3 years, vacations they'd post all over social media. But I'd never really thought about the money side of it because they made sure to constantly remind me how successful they were compared to their failure son. So Sunday morning, I did something simple. I called my parents' mortgage company. I pretended to be Dad and said I needed to verify the account details for a refinance. The customer service rep wouldn't give me everything, but she did confirm that yes, there was an account under that name and address. Then I called their country club, asked if they were still taking new members and what the monthly dues were. $800 a month. I wasn't trying to steal their identity or do anything illegal. I was just confirming what I suspected. They were overextended. The $40,000 shakedown wasn't just cruelty. They actually needed money and figured they could guilt me into paying while also keeping me away from the funeral. Then I made my move. I called every single person I could think of who was planning to attend Grandma's funeral. Aunt Carrie, Uncle Ralph, cousins, family, friends, people from Grandma's church. I told each of them the same thing. I'd been uninvited from my own grandmother's funeral because my parents were ashamed of my job and they were telling people I worked overseas to avoid embarrassment. I didn't lie. I didn't exaggerate. I just told them exactly what happened, including the part where my parents tried to extort $40,000 from me for funeral costs that were actually $12,000. Most people were shocked. A few tried to stay neutral, but by Sunday evening, my phone was buzzing with messages. Family members were calling my parents asking if it was true. Church ladies were leaving voicemails. The gossip network that my parents had tried so hard to control was now working against them. Then I did the thing that really set them off. I posted on social media. Nothing dramatic, just a simple post, heartbroken that I won't be able to attend my grandmother's funeral tomorrow due to family circumstances. She was an amazing woman who never judged anyone for their job or life choices. I'll miss you, Grandma. I didn't mention my parents directly. I didn't have to. Within an hour, people were commenting asking what happened. Family members who'd heard the story started dropping hints. Someone posted a crying emoji and said something about how sad it was when families value appearances over love. My parents' carefully constructed image was falling apart in real time. The funeral was scheduled for 10 a.m. Monday. At 11 p.m. Sunday night, my phone started ringing. Mom first, then Dad, then Declan. I didn't answer. I let every call go to voicemail. I wanted them to sit with what they'd done. At midnight, the voicemail started getting frantic. Okay, so the comments on my last post on Hidden Lies were wild. Some of you guessed what I did. Most of you were way off. And a few of you told me I should just let it go and move on. To those people, respectfully no. You don't get to uninvite someone from their grandmother's funeral and then face zero consequences. Let me back up to Sunday afternoon about 18 hours before they showed up outside my apartment screaming. After that phone call on Friday, I spent Saturday doing research. I called the funeral home like I mentioned and confirmed the actual cost. $12,000, not $40,000. Then I started thinking about why they'd lied about the price and it clicked. They needed money, not wanted. Needed. See, here's what I knew about my family's finances that they didn't realize I knew. 2 years ago at Thanksgiving, I overheard Dad on the phone in the garage. He was talking to someone about refinancing the house. He sounded stressed. Then last Christmas, Declan mentioned that he'd loaned Mom and Dad money for some repairs. He said it quietly to Zaria, but I was in the next room putting dishes away. My parents have always lived above their means. Country club membership they couldn't afford, new cars every 3 years, vacations they'd post all over social media. But I'd never really thought about the money side of it because they made sure to constantly remind me how successful they were compared to their failure son. So Sunday morning, I did something simple. I called my parents' mortgage company. I pretended to be Dad and said I needed to verify the account details for a refinance. The customer service rep wouldn't give me everything, but she did confirm that yes, there was an account under that name and address. Then I called their country club, asked if they were still taking new members and what the monthly dues were. $800 a month. I wasn't trying to steal their identity or do anything illegal. I was just confirming what I suspected. They were overextended. The $40,000 shakedown wasn't just cruelty. They actually needed money and figured they could guilt me into paying while also keeping me away from the funeral. Then I made my move. I called every single person I could think of who was planning to attend Grandma's funeral. Aunt Carrie, Uncle Ralph, cousins, family, friends, people from Grandma's church. I told each of them the same thing. I'd been uninvited from my own grandmother's funeral because my parents were ashamed of my job and they were telling people I worked overseas to avoid embarrassment. I didn't lie. I didn't exaggerate. I just told them exactly what happened, including the part where my parents tried to extort $40,000 from me for funeral costs that were actually $12,000. Most people were shocked. A few tried to stay neutral, but by Sunday evening, my phone was buzzing with messages. Family members were calling my parents asking if it was true. Church ladies were leaving voicemails. The gossip network that my parents had tried so hard to control was now working against them. Then I did the thing that really set them off. I posted on social media. Nothing dramatic, just a simple post, heartbroken that I won't be able to attend my grandmother's funeral tomorrow due to family circumstances. She was an amazing woman who never judged anyone for their job or life choices. I'll miss you, Grandma. I didn't mention my parents directly. I didn't have to. Within an hour, people were commenting asking what happened. Family members who'd heard the story started dropping hints. Someone posted a crying emoji and said something about how sad it was when families value appearances over love. My parents' carefully constructed image was falling apart in real time. The funeral was scheduled for 10 a.m. Monday. At 11 p.m. Sunday night, my phone started ringing. Mom first, then Dad, then Declan. I didn't answer. I let every call go to voicemail. I wanted them to sit with what they'd done. At midnight, the voicemail started getting frantic. Dad was shouting about disrespect. Someone from another apartment yelled at them to shut up. Another neighbor threatened to call the cops. Finally, around 2:45 a.m. they left. But the texts didn't stop. All four of them were messaging me. And now other family members were getting involved too. Aunt Carrie sent me a long message about how I was tearing the family apart. Cousin Russell said I should have just stayed quiet. I went to bed at 3 a.m. and woke up at 6 to 73 text messages and 14 missed calls. The funeral was in 4 hours and I had to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to show up anyway. Part of me wanted to let them suffer through it knowing everyone was talking about them. Part of me just wanted to go back to sleep and forget any of this ever happened. But here's what I couldn't stop thinking about. They still didn't apologize. Not once in all those voicemails and texts did anyone say they were sorry for what they'd done. They were only upset because they got caught. They were only panicking because their image was ruined. At 7 a.m., Mom called again. This time, I answered. She immediately started talking about how I needed to fix this, how I needed to tell everyone it was a misunderstanding, how I was embarrassing them. I let her talk for about 3 minutes straight before I said anything. Then I asked her one question. Are you ashamed of me? She got quiet. Then she said it wasn't about shame. It was about presentation, about what people think, about maintaining certain standards. She said, when you come from a good family, you have responsibilities to uphold that image. I told her, I deliver pizza. That's what I do. And if that's too embarrassing for her, then she doesn't actually have a son. She started crying again and handed the phone to Dad. He wasn't crying. He was angry. He told me I'd better fix this mess I'd created or there would be consequences. I asked what kind of consequences. He said they'd cut me off completely. I'd never be welcome in their home again. They'd tell the whole family I was unstable. I almost laughed. They'd already cut me off. They'd already uninvited me from the funeral. What exactly did they think they could take away that they hadn't already tried to take? I told Dad I'd see him at the funeral and hung up. At 9:30 a.m., I got dressed in the only suit I own. It's not expensive, but it's clean and it fits. I drove to the funeral home and parked in the back lot. I could see people arriving. Family members, church friends, Grandma's Bridge Club ladies. I watched my parents pull up in their Lexus. Declan and Piper arrived in his BMW. Zaria came with some guy I'd never seen before. I sat in my car for 20 minutes watching everyone go inside. Then I got out and walked to the entrance. That's when things got really complicated. Update 2. So yeah, I went after everything they'd done. After the 2 a.m. screaming session, after being explicitly told to stay away, I showed up to my grandmother's funeral. The comments on my last update on Hidden Lies were split. Half of you said I should go and hold my head high. The other half said showing up would just cause more drama and I should let them suffer without me. To be honest, I didn't decide until I was already sitting in that parking lot watching everyone go inside. But here's what pushed me over the edge. This was my grandmother, the one person in that family who treated me like I mattered. And they didn't get to take that goodbye away from me just because they were ashamed of my job. I walked up to the entrance at exactly 9:55 a.m. The funeral was supposed to start at 10 o'clock. I could see through the glass doors that people were still milling around the lobby, signing the guest book, that kind of thing. The second I opened the door, I saw Mom. She was talking to one of Grandma's church friends, and her whole body went rigid when she spotted me. She said something quick to the church lady and then came straight at me. She grabbed my arm and pulled me to the side over by the coat rack area. She was trying to smile, but her jaw was clenched. She asked what I was doing here, keeping her voice low enough that people nearby couldn't hear. I told her I was attending my grandmother's funeral. She said we talked about this. I'd agreed to stay away. I definitely had not agreed to anything. I reminded her that she'd uninvited me, demanded $40,000 and then showed up screaming outside my apartment at 2 a.m. None of that counted as an agreement. She switched tactics, started saying how I'd already caused enough damage, how everyone was talking about our family drama, how I needed to think about what was best for everyone. I asked her if she'd thought about what was best for me when she told me I was too embarrassing to acknowledge. Dad came over then. He was doing that thing where he smiles for everyone watching, but speaks through his teeth. He said I needed to leave immediately or he'd have me removed. I asked who was going to remove me, him, the funeral director. I was a family member attending a funeral. I had every right to be there. That's when Declan appeared with Piper. She looked uncomfortable, like she didn't want to be part of this. Declan, though, he was angry. He said I was being selfish and making everything about me when it should be about Grandma. I pointed out that I wasn't the one who uninvited a family member and tried to extort money. That was all them. Piper actually spoke up. She said maybe they should all just go inside and get through the service. Declan told her to stay out of it. She looked hurt but backed off. More people were starting to notice the commotion. I could see Aunt Carrie watching from across the lobby. Cousin Russell was pretending not to see us. Some of Grandma's friends were definitely staring. The funeral director came over and asked if everything was all right. Mom immediately put on her sweet voice and said, "Yes. Just some family discussions." The director looked at me and asked if I was family. I said, "Yes, grandson." He nodded and walked away. That made Dad even angrier. He said I was humiliating them, that I'd already destroyed their reputation by telling everyone what happened. I said I'd simply told people the truth. If the truth was humiliating, maybe they should think about why that was. Zaria had been standing back during all this. But now she came forward. She said I was being vindictive and petty, that families keep things private, and I'd violated that by airing everything publicly. I asked her if she thought it was okay that they donated all my childhood belongings without asking me. She blinked and said that wasn't relevant right now. Except it was relevant. Everything they'd done was relevant. The years of treating me like I was worthless because of my job. The constant comparisons to my siblings and cousins. The lying about what I do for a living because they were too ashamed to tell the truth. All of it was part of why we were standing in a funeral home lobby arguing instead of saying goodbye to Grandma together. The funeral director came back and announced that the service was beginning. People started moving toward the chapel. My family just stood there looking at me. Mom said one more time that I should leave, that it would be better for everyone. I told her I wasn't leaving and I walked toward the chapel. They followed me. What else could they do? Make a bigger scene? The chapel was set up with rows of chairs. Grandma's casket was at the front, closed, with flowers all around it. I found a seat in the third row. My family sat in the front row, which was reserved for immediate family. The exact row where I should have been sitting if they hadn't uninvited me. The service started. The pastor talked about Grandma's life, her faith, her kindness. Different people got up to share memories. Aunt Carrie spoke about growing up with Grandma as their mother. One of Grandma's bridge club friends shared a funny story about a card game. Then they invited family members to speak. Dad got up and talked about what a wonderful mother-in-law Grandma had been. Declan shared a memory from when he was a kid. Zaria read a poem. Nobody invited me to speak. Nobody acknowledged I was there. When the family sharing portion ended, the pastor said we'd moved to the burial portion at the cemetery. He mentioned that the pallbearers should come forward. 6 men stood up. Uncle Ralph, Cousin Russell, Declan, and 3 of Grandma's church friends. I'd been replaced as a pallbearer. I knew this already, but seeing Russell stand up where I should have been standing made it real in a different way. We all filed out to cars for the processional to the cemetery. Mom tried to position herself, so I couldn't get near the family cars. I just walked to my Camry and followed the line of vehicles. At the cemetery, they had a canopy set up over the grave site with chairs underneath for family. Again, front row for immediate family. I stood in the back with some of Grandma's more distant friends and neighbors. The burial service was short. More prayers. Some final words from the pastor. Then it was over and people started dispersing. Some folks went straight to their cars. Others lingered to talk or offer condolences to my parents. I walked up to the casket before they lowered it. I put my hand on it and said goodbye to Grandma quietly. Told her I was sorry for the drama, but I wasn't sorry for coming. She would have understood. When I turned around, Mom was right there. But this time, she wasn't angry. She was crying. Real crying. Not the manipulative kind. She said we needed to talk, that this had all gotten out of hand. I told her we could talk when she was ready to apologize. Not for the funeral drama, but for everything. For years of making me feel worthless. For lying about my job. For treating me like an embarrassment instead of their son. She said it wasn't that simple. That I didn't understand the pressure they were under. The expectations. I said that was the problem right there. They cared more about expectations than their own kid. Dad came over and said this wasn't the time or place. I agreed and started walking toward my car. Declan called after me, saying we needed to resolve this. I turned back and asked what there was to resolve. They'd made it.